I got it. Fantastic.
Good.
Maybe we start in 2 minutes, Rana?
Sure, I'm ready. As soon as it is, you set the stage and I present and can the thing. And that's the argument. And then we can use all of us parts of this argument if you think it's valuable, to push it on.
That's right. That's right. This morning we had a Zoom call with a gallerist in Belgium.
Okay.
She is discussing with us about doing a residency, and she's very interested in ecology and at Centre. And we were mentioning your work. I was sending her some links, and literally I put in the link to Analog Forestry and you, and Dejan's reminder suddenly popped up at the same time. Very, very sweet, And,
oh, wow. Nice.
Along and say hello, just
nice.
Have to.
Oh, cool. All right.
Good. Okay. No, I sent her. Well, I don't know if she'll be able to join. I know she had other meetings today, but anyway, I've sent the link, so that was nice. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're just going to can this. And this is basically the creation of the platform. So then we'll begin, and then I'll present, and this will hopefully develop into the format of all the discussions we can have on the issue of the global commons.
Global commons, yes.
Good.
Get my brother in.
I think to move on. People will join in as they would.
Yeah.
And they will be admitted through the program.
Mm-hmm.
So, good day to you all, and welcome to a webinar presentation of a part series named Belipola Dialogues. My name is Dehan D'Souza, and I am the Managing Director of Belipola Arboretum. Belipola is the world's first analog forest. It's a restoration landscape that has focused on restoring biodiversity and scaled biomass to support that biodiversity. It's not only the restoration of these aspects, but how this restoration is and does affect organic agriculture and also a vision of moving beyond organic agriculture. In this way, we are looking to scale a new yield in not only crop, but a yield in ecosystem services. However, as we realize, as we restore and as we innovate, we need to identify our colleagues, our students, as well as participants in the global restoration process about what our vision is. And actually, Dr. Ranil, who will be delivering today's lecture or presentation, has hypothesized and theorized on analog forestry, as well as very many effects of its restoration, but he sees a new direction in restoring the global commons. And this is the dialogue and this is the discourse that we will be going over today, how the premise of our restoration and our involvement in this practice would benefit the greater global commons. So without much further ado, from this backdrop, this magnificent backdrop of Belipola, I give you Dr. Ranil Senanayake, a systems ecologist of great repute. Thank you.
Thank you, Dehan. Let me share the screen. Tell me if you can see my screen. Can you see my? Okay, share screen. Right.
Yeah.
See my screen? Yes?
Yes.
Good. Okay, let's begin. The global commons, what I'd like to talk to everybody about is that we have rights by the global commons And we have responsibilities by the global commons. And that's what I would like to take you through as some of the aspects of the global commons. And I'm hoping that this now creates discussion and dialogue, because if we do not look after the commons, the tragedy of the commons is bound to follow. Now, the global commons basically is our shared wealth. Here is a description of what the global commons is from Wikipedia. It's a common resource that we have. In this discussion, though, I'm going to focus basically on the commons of air and on the commons of water, and I'll touch on the commons of soil. Now, this is our wealth, the global commons. The global cycles of materials that define the space for life is called the biosphere. The biosphere is where all the living things live. And the biosphere basically is consistent of and interacting with what's called the pedosphere, the soil, the atmosphere, the air, and the hydrosphere, the water. Two of this is still largely a part of the global commons, while the other has now descended into individual or group ownership. I talk about the pedosphere, the soil, because politically now we have broken that up and there's no continuity of the soil except in the form of private ownership, and is cut up and used in this manner. Now, first, historically, abuse of the commons always led to its erosion. We've seen this. The tragedy of the commons has been told to us many times. We can use the commons at a sustainable rate, but if we increase the use of the commons and intensify it, we destroy it. We destroy the very base that sustains us. So given this now, we should look at what we have done to ourselves. Here's an example, modern example of the abuse of the commons. If you look at the space that we allocate for wild animals, for wild mammals, this is what it is. Just 4% of the biomass of the planet is in wild mammals. It's horrifying when you consider it like this. We've sucked up the space, basically, just for ourselves. Now, okay, to do this now, we must start looking at the commons. What are the commons as currently recognized? There is the atmosphere. Let's start with the atmosphere. The atmosphere basically is in the area where life is possible. This is the troposphere, and it goes up into a finer and finer layers around the planet. It is consistent mostly of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide at 0.04%, and rare gases. Consider carbon dioxide, the thing that we are all concerned about, the thing that is creating global climate change, that's endangering everything, is started in our atmosphere at a mere 0.04%. So keep an eye on this atmosphere when we are trying to consider the atmosphere as the commons. Because into the atmosphere, many things have come. Carbon dioxide, as I pointed out, though small in total volume, is the driver of the current crisis. And volcanic activity, both on land and undersea, generate roughly about 200 million tons of carbon dioxide annually into the atmosphere. And this has been going on for millions and millions of years. But the concentration in the atmosphere was kept stable because the excess carbon dioxide was constantly being incorporated into the rock, the lithosphere, and fossilized. This is the action that maintains the current carbon dioxide concentration. Now, if you look at what's going on, basically, it's the living process that prevented volcanic carbon dioxide from building up in large concentrations. It's a living process, it's self-regulating. So the living process would take the carbon dioxide as it came out of the volcanoes and then lock it up in living biomass, and then put it into the rock where it will not then ever interact with the living biomass. This process has been going on for millions of years, and it is this process that has given us the oxygen-rich atmosphere that we are breathing today. Now, the engine that maintains this living process is termed photosynthesis, and its action produces the primary ecosystem services. These are the first acts of life. The composition of the global commons of air is a consequence of the ecosystem services provided by this photosynthetic biomass. What it is doing here is, this is the first step of life. The first ecological step is the locking up of solar energy so that life can use it. And out of that come the sugars, the things that the carbon compounds and oxygen. And this process is a process that gives us the primary ecosystem services. Beyond this, everything else that happens in the ecosystem is secondary. This is needed. This is the trigger. This is the bricks on which all of life is made. And in nature, the photosynthetic biomass, this wonderful substance, which is the site of the primary ecosystem services, always increases in time if undisturbed. And as the leaf biomass increases, as this increases over time, so does the volume of the primary ecosystem services. And this photosynthetic biomass now is the only production system that contributes to maintaining the global cycle, oxygen cycle. On an average, it's been estimated that a tree can produce about 120 kilograms more or less of oxygen per year. And at an average, a human being needs roughly about 750 kilograms of oxygen a year to breathe. So all of humanity, every year, we're consuming about 7 billion tons of oxygen. But that is not the problem. This is the problem. The total worldwide oil consumption was, some 4 years ago, 93 million barrels per day. Looking at the average carbon dioxide output, using the generalized formula for the combustion of this, it requires over 39 million tons of, it creates of carbon dioxide, which requires 26 million tons of oxygen per day for the burning of oil. This is approximately the oxygen output of 221, almost 222 million trees working for 1 year. We burn that in 1 day, just in the use of the oil. And we are taking down all the trees, and we are reducing the effectivity of the ocean to produce the oxygen while we are doing this, while we are burning it up. So the commons is being compromised. If you look at what's happening in the commons, this is fossil fuel consumption. These are the countries that are responsible. Here's the livestock. So you see who's using the oxygen, and what's happening to the oxygen is falling down in the atmosphere. And when you look at who's using it, human respiration, yeah, we have this tiny little yellow thing here, right? And all the animals and things here. but it's the use of fossil fuel. This is the huge consumer of oxygen. And they're not doing anything about it, just using it as a free rider. So we are mining the global commons, we are mining the atmosphere without responsibility. And we are also polluting it with fossil fuel. If you look at the carbon concentration in the atmosphere, it's going up, while the oxygen concentration is coming down. These are the trends. It's been pointed out over and over again. It's the carbon stored in coal, petroleum, and natural gas. This, when consumes the life-giving oxygen, not only putting out the gases that give climate change. So the global commons here is being compromised. Now I'll move to the pedosphere, and this is the soil, the great body of soil. The Earth's body of soil, called the pedosphere, has 4 important functions. It's a medium for plant growth. It's a means of water storage. It's going to be really important as a modifier of Earth's atmosphere, something we will consider at the end of this talk. It's a habitat for organisms. And all these functions in their turn modify the soil and its properties. But when we look into soil, one thing to consider is this 5% organic matter. The rest happens as a part of the planetary process. This is life. And this is something that should concern us deeply. It is because soil is the most specious ecosystem on Earth. Vast majority of soil organisms are microbes. Great many have not yet even been described. Now, if we look at the composition of soil organic matter, remember in the last slide, we saw that it's just 5%. This 5% is comprised of decomposing organic matter, stabilized organic matter, living organisms, and fresh residue. Now, this living organisms in this bit, if you take the soil then and look at it, in 1 gram of good soil, the living organisms may account for about 1 to 2 billion individual bacterial cells. Sharing the same gram, there are about 100 to 200 million individual actinomycetes. Sharing the same gram, there is about a kilometer of length of fungal hyphae. Sharing the same gram, there are thousands of algal cells, nematodes, collemboids, arthropods, etc. This is what living soil is. And when we start putting energy into living soil as fertilizer, this is what happens. External energy and disturbance into the soil loses biomass and it loses its productivity. Why? Because when we put fertilizer into the soil, the biodiversity goes down because the nitrogen fixing bacteria and other decomposing bacteria have no chance. It amplifies the role of everything that feeds on nitrogen, which we are putting into the soil, and it destroys the soil ecosystem. And this is what is happening with modern agriculture. And when the soil ecosystem is destroyed, productivity stops without putting nutrients into it constantly. Because the energy now, the living energy, has been lost from the soil ecosystem. And when we talk about soil and carbon, there's a huge difference we must understand in terms of dynamic carbon and stored carbon. If you look at the wetlands here, there's a huge amount of stored carbon that is inert. It's not interacting in photosynthesis and participating in chemosynthesis. The active part is small. You look at a tropical forest, the active part is almost as large as the soil part, which means that this ecosystem is moving energy around very, very fast. So this has an incredible large amount of dynamic carbon, where these ecosystems have minimal or smaller amounts of dynamic carbon. So when you're talking carbon storage, we also have very much to look at the type of carbon we're talking about in terms of carbon storage. Then, while soil restoration must become a goal, is seen in these two views. Here's a soil degradation map. Over the last 150 years, half of the topsoil of this planet has been lost. And if you look at soil organic matter, which is the topsoil, these are all the functions it does. So soil, or the pedosphere, is actually a living thing, and we do not treat it as such. Soil has to be watered, soil has to be fed, soil has to be protected. Otherwise, it disappears. It is a living thing. Look at what we are doing. We take the soil, this is how the soil is, the living stuff puts the roots down, the bacteria act on it, they decant down into the subsoil, and we replace it with this or this. There is nothing goes through. No water goes through, no air goes through. So with urbanization, all the interactions between the earth and the sky stop. With urbanization, these huge cycles of gas and water that the soil did with the atmosphere come to a close. And we call it development. And the developers do not spend or pay 1 penny in opportunity cost to the ecosystem services they rob from an area when they begin to seal it over with roads and with construction. These are the considerations for the pedosphere. Now the hydrosphere. The hydrosphere is the total amount of water on a planet. So the oceans, the ice, the atmosphere, etc., is the hydrosphere. Now humanity, all of us, we require 5,600, etc., billion liters of clean water annually for drinking. In the hydrosphere, clean water is maintained by two sources. One is evaporation. Water evaporates, sunlight falls on the water, heats it, it evaporates and is clean when it evaporates. The other is transpiration from the leaves of plants. Again, a function that's been totally ignored by people who are looking at agriculture, because the leaves of plants bring up polluted groundwater. All groundwater in most places is polluted. The leaves of plants bring up the polluted groundwater, clean the water, and when it enters a plant, it's absolutely clean. When it transpires as clean water. This is how plants and trees clean water for humanity to drink. At a rate of usually 50,000 liters per year per large tree, and we do not attribute any value to trees and plants and forests for cleaning the very water that we drink. While it's cleaning water, here's another function. Transpiration produces cooling. So one large tree has a cooling equivalent of about 10 room-size air conditioning units working about 10 hours a day, which is about 1,200,000 British thermal units of cooling. There is global warming around us, and we are clearing the forests when all this amazing amount of cooling material is available in the global commons. And something to think about is, when the colonial adventure began, which is about when global warming started kicking off, we took down most of the forests of the planet. And thereby, was that a trigger before the Industrial Revolution that began heating the planet when we took the trees with this cooling factor out? And can we use it again to now bring cooling into areas which will desperately need it? To be thought about. The hydrosphere again is compromised also below ground. Why? Because for agriculture, we keep pumping water out. We keep pumping groundwater at this tremendous rate. We keep using surface water at this tremendous rate. So as a consequence of pulling this water out, water stress will be tremendous in our part of the world. And that's something, again, to think about. And the pedosphere, the soil, and the hydrosphere interact to hold water. Here's another example of the hydrosphere, the global oceans. The oceans, is the commons, not owned by anybody. But this figure here shows you what happens to the commons. Tragically, this figure shows Sri Lanka as the worst polluter of the Indian Ocean. There's a halo of pollution around. This is from Google. Anyone of you can take a look at it. But look at this. This lump here and this dark spot here is where the shipping lines come and touch our waters, and that's where they dump. Nobody checks. You can just look at it on Google and you can see the problems. Here is the land-based pollution coming out of Trincomalee. Can we do something about it? Okay, so as a proposition, here's something we can do positively to the commons. We can look at it as a resource. Now, Arthur Clarke, look at Sri Lanka. Let me take you back. This is Trincomalee, where all the garbage comes out, and you can see the garbage out here, out of the river. There's a deep trench there, and Arthur C. Clarke first proposed using the temperature gradient, this huge temperature gradient, to generate free energy. Many people have been interested, but we still have to get the government interested, because I suppose, you don't sell coal and oil and stuff to generate energy. This is free energy. Now, if you use this free energy here in Trincomalee, this is about 1 kilometer wide by 1 kilometer deep here. You bring up cold water to the surface to drive this thing. In the future to come, the bleaching of corals is going to be a thing all through the oceans. And the corals of the Indo-Pacific are going to be tremendously compromised. If we use the cold water that we can bring up here to turn Trincomalee into a coral gene bank, very much the same way that Svalbard in Norway is used for the seeds of plants, we can control the temperature and keep collections of coral for re-establishing in this very uncertain, warming world ahead of us. So here's a proposition for Sri Lanka, and where we can interact with the world and do something positive for the commons of the hydrosphere. Now, how can we do all these things? Where's the money? Well, the currently recognized value for global ecosystem services in 2011 was about $125 trillion a year. And everybody's looking to see, we know the value is there. How can we now realize this value? One way we are suggesting that as all ecosystem services, all ecosystem services begin with primary productivity, it is the generation of primary ecosystem services that we discussed before. That is the first ecosystem service. that we can look towards this large value to capitalize on. How do we do this? This is because the initial or primary ecosystem services are those produced by a living leaf. These primary ecosystem services are oxygen production, solar energy sequestration, cycling of water into the global commons. But today, under the current economy, in this picture, only the fruit has value in the economy, and that fruit too, only after it's plucked and sent to market. And if somebody says the leaves have value, then say, yeah, but you got to pluck it and send it to market. Under the economy that we produce, that we propose, the leaves too have great value, but they have value only as long as it is attached to the tree, as long as it is living and producing primary ecosystem services. This new economy then, for the first time, can begin to put a value on life. So, looking at this, taking from the global commons without replacement is looked at economically as a negative externality. Adding into the global commons voluntarily is a positive externality. Here are some examples of a positive and negative externality. Now, this gives us two paths to the future, two sources of energy, two platforms for productivity that will describe the choices before us. One is an economy based on primary productivity that creates positive externalities into the global commons. The other economy is what we have right now, is based on the combustion of fossil fuels. It creates negative externalities into the global commons. So this way forward before us, one consumes oxygen from the commons, the other replaces oxygen to the commons. Here are the conflicting ideologies, the economies on how humanity should develop, where we should look to get the energy for our development and our responsibility by the global commons. The leaves of plants that we were talking about, the leaves of plants provide a surface area about 4.3 times the total surface area of land on this planet. As we discussed before, they are the life support system of this planet, and they are being lost at an exponential rate. And if we look at the planet, the only area on the surface of this earth, the good land that can be farmed, that has living soils, is 8 to 10%. That's all we have on this entire planet. 8 to 10% of the surface of this planet is what has living soils, which can support the plants, that will support the leaves, that will do the primary ecosystem services to enable humanity to survive. If this is not a problem, here is another one. In addition, these two photographs demonstrate the stomata, the pores on the leaves of plants, same species, taken in Florida a few decades. This is about 100 years apart. What is happening is, as the carbon dioxide CO2 concentration increases, the stomata, the pores on the leaves decrease. We need more leaves to get the same services that we used to have before. So this is now another thing that just pushes us to say it's even more urgent, seeing things like this, that we have to increase the photosynthetic biomass as fast as we can. The global commons of air, this is what it is, this thin layer. The blue color of our skies, this blue color is oxygen bouncing off sunlight. And this oxygen in this atmosphere, this finite layer, is decreasing. And that is a huge problem when we're addressing the global commons. One way to address this loss is to increase primary ecosystem service production by placing a value on positive externalities. We have done this with Earth Restoration, one of the first companies to step out to do this. I encourage people who are interested to go to our webpage and check it out. And by doing this, we have set up trials which are now complete. And what it is showing us is, here's an example of some of the trials. This is just 7 ladies working with 45 units, trees and plants, produced for the global commons 5,731 liters of oxygen for breathing and 2,000 liters of clean water, their personal contribution to the global commons that we all use. So here then is the challenge. Placing a value on ecosystem services can move us from the current hydrocarbon-driven economy to a carbohydrate-driven economy. Such an economy, based on recognizing value in positive externalities, can begin to address the erosion of the global commons. Here is one way for us to address the global commons, and I encourage others to find many other ways to address the global commons, because it is a problem common to every human living on this planet. Thank you very much. If there are questions, please send it forward. We'll be happy to answer. Thank you. Okay.
Well done. Thanks a lot, Ranil. That was wonderful.
Sure.
Really, so the global commons. Now,
Yes.
you were talking about externalities, and
Yes.
one way.
Positive externalities, positive and negative.
So this is one way that we can really recognize how to participate or how our interaction with the global commons can begin.
Yes.
So I just, as a company at Belipola, based at Belipola, and doing research into this,
Mm-hmm.
we are looking for people to engage in this kind of discussion about how to evolve practices such as restoration, such as business, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and education to benefit this scalar level of positive and negative externalities.
True. There's another thing also that we can take on, and Heather, even in your presentations or performances, see, this is a simple thing that should confirm it to all of us. Basically, you just close your eyes and take a deep breath. Take a deep breath, and as you go, you are aware that that breath was made possible for you by a plant somewhere, someplace, sometime. You have a little bit of gratitude. I took a breath. Thank you. That is a realization of who we are and the relationship we have to the world around. See, it's these things that we have to bring about. In art, these are the performances we have to bring about. In science, these are the descriptions we have to bring about. And in economy, these are the value adding, processes that we have to bring about.
Completely. Yeah.
Yeah, economy and the ecology, I think there is a particular point in time at this era that we can transcend this understanding and integrate this understanding into our lives. So from Belipola, we really want to encourage a think tank, a global think tank related to the global commons. And this is something that needs to come about organically through these such discussions. I know that there is a dialogue out there. I mean, Heather, you're in the UK. I think there is a global commons dialogue that's going on in the UK as well.
There are some very heated conversations going on in many different sectors. The one that Dan and I are involved with through the cultural sector, being artists, there is, for the last 3 years, 4 years, artists and organizations have declared a climate and ecological emergency.
Great.
As have musicians, as have architects, and also blue chip galleries too. It's interesting, actually, Ranil, seeing your talk, because it's called I think it's the Gallery Climate Coalition.
Okay.
Bearing in mind that, the art market can turn over multi-millions, billions of pounds annually. And they will always be moving around the globe and following where the money is coming through. But one thing that the Gallery Climate Coalition have tried to do is to stop flights of transporting of artworks, and they are doing this through shipping. I just did notice as well, it's an issue I can see, and I was very interested to see your particular slide where you were showing these big ships are dumping stuff. Now, what exactly? I just wanted to ask, what exactly are they dumping?
They're cleaning the bilge out. They're washing their ship. Whatever they're doing, it looks like they have points before they enter territorial waters where they have, and everybody seems to do it. That's why the concentration. That's why the dark areas. It's like common practice area, like where they dump the stuff. So, I mean, that photo is so telling.
It is very, very telling. I mean, just talking about networks and bringing this to a larger conversation, we would really like to work towards something in September or October with, there's people we know in this country working on a small scale, on a larger scale, about restoration of land, giving back land, health of the soil. And they are already making connections with the cultural sector in their own way, or have done. So just one thing that we would like to take charge of is looking to put this bigger conversation and inviting, some of the cultural organizations.
Super.
In fact, I have a meeting tomorrow, so I will put the proposal forward.
Great. Here's something else that might be useful. That thing I gave you on the corals and Trinco.
Yes.
The whole thing was originally Arthur C. Clarke is the one who said OTEC. And Arthur C. Clarke and England, I mean, hello, right? Okay. So you said this is Arthur C. Clarke's idea on how to, use the cold waters of Trinco to generate free energy for the country, right? We don't have to get suckered into coal and oil. We just use the temperature differential. That's all. That's what Arthur said. And then as a byproduct, we create this amazing sanctuary for corals, right? Which puts Sri Lanka on the map.
I think that is just incredible. And this morning, I was reading New Scientist, and there was an article that caught my attention where they are introducing, so I'm just going to find it, corals to start to try and grow on wind turbines in places. So they're just introducing this in Taiwan. So there could be another aspect here as well. Baby coral planted on the base of offshore wind farm. So I'm just sort of thinking again, there could be, and this is a Danish company who are involved with this.
Great. Try it. Let's try and connect.
I'll send you the link.
Super.
Sure.
Yeah,
okay.
Do that.
Yeah.
Great.
I think really, really interesting about that bringing up that.
Okay. Now, there's a couple of other things here, right? And I was slow on that part, and that I have on another presentation, and that is, without the plants above, there can be no life in the soil below. Without life in the soil below, there can be no plants that grow above. Okay? They're so intertwined. People do not yet seem to appreciate that so that when we make a meadow or a farm, if we have trees interspersed in it, they deepen the soil, because the living soil follows the roots of the trees. There's no other food for them, right? Because plants feed soil, right? It's the depth of the roots and the spread of the roots that keep the soil going. So running tractors up and down these things, you can dump whatever organic matter you want. You're not going to keep your soil alive.
Yeah.
So there's something else.
Thank you.
Sure.
In the forum, wish to make any comments or participate in the discussion as and where it stands? If not, I will share these slides also with you, and I will also send you an agenda for how our next schedules will be for what Ranil is going to be presenting. We will move along the same lines because there's always this restoration and happening, and there is the benefit of which the global commons is the potential for it to feel. All of us can begin to scale this way and bring our networks in to join this discussion. Of course, it need not be linear. It can be, it has to be, there has to be a discourse, both ways. So please brush yourself up on the global commons, and I feel really small when I think of the global commons. So
Yeah.
let's all touch base on that, and if there are any comments, please, this forum is open for the next 5-10 minutes, and look forward to an email from me, PDF version of Ranil's presentation today.
Thank you.
There is one comment, I think. No. Anyway, the chat window is on, and there has been some links that's been shared on there.
Cool.
Thanks, Devan, for sharing.
Great.
All right, folks, enjoy your time.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.